Hi everyone, how are you going? I'm here today in Matara, which is on the south coast of Sri Lanka, just a little bit eastward of Galle. And so we are currently traveling around the place, giving away our sort of central translations of the Suttas and Vinaya to the Sangha and various places and so on around the place. And yeah, it's been fun so far. They love doing a bit of pageantry, and so we've had like Sri Lankan dancers and drummers at the last one. Last one I particularly liked because they had it was at a, I think they were kids from like a Navy school or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but they did like a whole marching band thing. And so we were led in there with this kind of marching band of school kids who were playing this song, which I swear sounded exactly like a Tom Waits backing track. Like if Tom Waits had sung that, like he would have loved it. But anyway, I'm not sure if that was deliberate or not. But anyway, so for this week's class, so we've done 2 classes so far. And for this week's class, and for those past 2, we started out by looking at the Apannaka Jātaka, the first one of the Jātakas, which, as we saw, dealt with almost a kind of surprisingly mercantile themes of how to be a successful trader and so on. And we noticed that this reflects something of the social and cultural context in which Buddhism spread at that time, and also that the title of that story, if you recall, was an image derived from gambling. The Apannaka literally means a set without a fifth, being a reference to the ancient Indian game of dice. And the following week, we looked at the Katahari Jātaka, which in contrast is not so much sort of commercial and practical, but which embodies a lot of deep mythic concepts and ideas. And it's one of those stories in the Jātakas which, to my mind, reflect like an emergence or an echo of very old mythology and old storytelling, which could be traced back even as far as the incursion of Indo-European peoples into India, perhaps even earlier. For this week, we're looking at something different again. And of course, one of the purposes of this entire course is to illustrate the variety of things we find in the Jātakas. And so this week, we are looking at one which is less inspiring than the last couple of weeks, I'm going to admit. And this one is in the chapter, which is a chapter about women. And you may already be having some red flags about that one. And I can guarantee you that whatever you think it is, it's probably going to be a lot worse. So anyway, let us continue and see what the Jataka actually says. All right, so before... So Dawn says they need to be off camera and listening with keen interest. So Dawn, I hope that you're doing well. And a message there from Ananda. He saw the Dhammayatra ceremony in BMICH. Yeah, so we did a big ceremony at BMICH. So that was nice. Oh yeah, but for those of you who are here, just to let you know, if you can turn your cameras on, then it's very much appreciated, because it's very nice for me to give a talk to people who actually exist. Yay, human beings. Good, thank you. So good to see you. All right, so now as a preparation for this story, I just want to make a note that this is one of the stories which is represented in the Bharahut stupas. So, and just a little bit of background on that. In ancient India and in the Buddha's time, we unfortunately don't really have any archaeology that goes back as far as the Buddha. It seems that most architecture at the time was wooden, and we don't really have much, maybe a few bits of pottery and a few things like that go back to the time of the Buddha. And it's not until the time of Ashoka, maybe 150 years later, that we get large-scale monumental architecture. Subsequent to Ashoka, then one of the earliest sites is the stupa at Bharut. And this is maybe begun, maybe 200 or 300 years after the Buddha, and then developed over a period of time after that. And it's one of the early sites because it features aniconic representations of the Buddha. That means that the Buddha is represented not as a Buddha image, but as a seat, or as a Bodhi tree, or as the feet, or some other kind of symbol for the Buddha. And so Bharut is one of the main sources of the early Indian archaeology. And a lot of really beautiful sculpture and so on is from there. Now, one of the things that we find at Bharut is a pictorial representation of a number of Jātaka stories. And if you've looked at Thomas Rhys Davids' book, then you will see a number of these. And so this would perform the same role that we still see in temples today. And just yesterday we were visiting a temple in Gaul where they had a stupa and pictorial representations of various Jātaka stories and other kinds of stories around the walls. And originally this would have been for like pilgrimage. Either these stories might remind you, the images might remind you of the story, or else they're used as an education tool. So you'd go around there with a teacher, and the teacher would tell you the story as you would go to each one. And on the grandest scale of this idea we find in, of course, in Borobudur in Indonesia. Oh, I should mention just incidentally, that temple that I mentioned, it wasn't actually that temple. Another temple I went to yesterday in Gaul was the temple where Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky took the 5 precepts in, was it 1880 something, and they were the first, officially regarded as the first Westerners who took the 5 precepts and converted to Buddhism. Actually, I'm sure there's been Westerners converted to Buddhism beforehand, but that's kind of technically the idea. So this was like the foundation of, really, I was thinking about it in many ways, the foundation place for modern Buddhism. And also that was the place where the first Sunday school was established, or first Dhamma school for kids was established. So again, the beginnings of kind of modern Buddhist education in that place. So that's just close by here. All right. So Dhirayupa has to go and drive her mum to the airport. Please, Dhirayupa, give your mum my best wishes and my blessings. And next week we can watch the topic is on climate change. Interestingly enough, the Jātaka, the Serivanija Jātaka, was one of the ones which I saw depicted on the walls of the stupa we just visited yesterday. So that's kind of interesting. Actually, I should have taken a photo of it, but anyway. All right. So here you can see the image, and like I said, not a very good quality one, but that's a depiction of the story that we're seeing today. So you can see that the main character there is the young maiden who is dancing, and with her arms, her right arm outstretched. Seated to her right is the Brahmin, who is the villain of the character, insofar as there is a villain. But anyway, he's kind of the villain, and he's sitting there playing the veena. And so the veena is not the modern veena, which is kind of like a guitar-like instrument, but the plucked instrument. But the ancient veena would have been an arched harp. And he can't really see it there, but he has a cloth over his face because he's been blindfolded. And you can see that from the girl's right shoulder, there is another arm reaching up, and that arm has a clenched fist. and that is the arm and the fist of the girl's lover, who is taking advantage of the situation to punch the Brahmin in the face. Okay? So you can see it's quite a quite a particular image, right? This is not just like a generic, dancing girl image or something like that. This is very definitely a specific representation of this story. And if we click out from the image, Rob, back to the main page there, and then if you scroll down, great, there you can see it says the inscription. And the inscription, young Brahmano avayesi Jātakam, the Jataka because the Brahmana played. And that young Brahmano avayesi is in fact the first line of the Jataka verse that we have, that we're going to be reading. And the spelling is a little bit different, but it's clearly a quotation of the same line. So this is one of the things which is very historically significant about the Bharut Stupa. It shows that not only did these Jataka stories exist, right? It shows that the verses were already there, that was fixed. It shows that the story behind those verses was already known, not necessarily every detail of it, but you can see that there's like a lot of the assumptions in that story are already depicted there. And it shows that they were regarded as Jātaka stories. And not only does it show that they existed, but it shows that they were popular and prominent, because here they are. It's not easy to make that kind of sculpture. So somebody had the funds and the desire to create this image as a teaching or something like that. So this is this is why these Bharut Stupa inscriptions are highly significant. Now, and just in terms of the historical evolution of Buddhist texts, like we know on many grounds that the Jātaka tales must be later than the suttas. So if the Jātaka stories are already present, then of course they have the sutta layer must already be present as well. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can hear any noise, but there's a little bit of noise happening around here. So some of the guys are doing some work cleaning up the grounds and so on. So if you hear a sound, then that's what is going on here. All right, thanks, Rob. Can we go now to the Sutta Central link and have a look at the verse itself? All right, and I'm showing the notes there, which is a little bit long. We don't have to worry about that. Note is just a summary of the story, which we'll read in a minute, but just the verse, young Brahmano Abadesi. So you can see this is exactly the same as the inscription, a few minor details in spelling. The Brahmin who played the harp while blindfolded has raised his wife since infancy. Who would ever trust such women? All right. The Brahmin who played the harp while blindfolded had raised his wife since infancy. Who would ever trust such women? Right? And so you can see that there is obviously a, like the verse is not meant to tell a full story. It's clearly encapsulating a highlight of a story, and it's meant as a mnemonic to remind us of that story and to bring out certain features of that story. So let's now have a look at the story. Okay, so this is at the story about being inexperienced. Yeah, good. All right, so now, look, I just want to say before going on with this story that I just want you to all just take a nice deep breath, okay? Because this is probably going to be very triggering, all right? So if you feel this is very upsetting, that's okay. We can regard it as a kind of inoculation or something like that, because there's some pretty wild stuff going on here. And look, I'm going to say this, like this story is obviously blatantly misogynistic, and we're going to go into that in a minute, right? Nonetheless, okay, as a story, it's a pretty good story, actually. Like, it's funny and it's sexy and it's dramatic and it's unexpected, and it actually is pretty good storytelling if you kind of leave aside the whole moral story part of things. Okay. Rob, can you maybe expand that just like one notch in your browser? All right. And so notice that the opening line of the Jataka, that verse, the line that's bolded there, that Brahmin who with a veil. So this is like the how a lot of the Jatakas were identified. So you're quoting the first line of the verse as like a key for understanding, identifying the Jataka. And of course, that's the same line which is quoted in the Bharut Stupa. So this kind of is an old convention. So this story was told by the teacher while at Jetavana about another monk overcome by passion. Said the teacher, "Is the report true that you were overcome by passion, monk?" "Quite true," was the reply. "Monk, women cannot be guarded. In days gone by, the wise who kept watch over a woman from the moment she was born failed, nevertheless, to keep her safe." And so saying, he told the story of the past. So just briefly on the word guarded here. So the word guarded is rakita. And rakita has a kind of a bit of a spectrum of meaning. Often to be rakita is something like the English idiom of a guardian. So you have someone who's your guardian, who's somebody whose job is to protect you and keep you safe. So this is one of the meanings of that. So sometimes to take care of someone is to rakati someone is to take care of them, to protect them, to keep them safe, right? But it can also have the sense of to watch over and keep guard of someone, like you would a prisoner, as we shall see in the story. All right. In the past, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva came to life as the child of the queen consort. When he grew up, he mastered every accomplishment, and when at his father's death he came to be king, he proved a righteous king. All right. So this is a kind of, I find this is an interesting detail, because we shall see his behavior later on, which is not exactly righteous. So what I might do from here is read through the story just straight, and then we can come back and do some commentary and discussion of the story. Now, he used to play at dice with his family priest, and as he flung the golden dice upon the silver table, he would sing this catch for luck. "'Tis nature's law that rivers wind, trees grow of wood by law of kind, and given opportunity, all women work iniquity." As these lines always made the king win the game, the family priest was in a fair way to lose every penny he had in the world, and in order to save himself from utter ruin, he resolved to seek out a little maid that had never seen another man, and to keep her under lock and key in his own house. For, he thought, I couldn't manage to look after a girl who has seen another man. I must take a newborn baby girl and keep her under my thumb as she grows up, with a close guard over her, so that none may come near her, and she may be true to one man. Then I shall win of the king and grow rich. Now, he was skilled in signs, and seeing a poor woman who was about to become a mother, and knowing that her child would be a girl, he paid the woman to come and be confined in his house, and sent her away after her confinement with a present. The infant was brought up entirely by women, and no men other than himself were ever allowed to set eyes on her. When the girl grew up, she was subject to him, and he was her master. Now, while the girl was growing up, the family priest forbore to play with the king, but when she was grown up and under his own control, he challenged the king to a game. The king accepted, and play began. But when throwing the dice, the king sang his lucky catch, the family priest added, "Always excepting my girl." And then luck changed, and it was now the family priest who won, while the king lost. Thinking the matter over, the Bodhisattva suspected the family priest had a virtuous girl shut up in his house. An inquiry proved his suspicions true. Then, in order to work her fall, he sent for a clever fellow and asked whether he thought he could seduce the girl. "Certainly, sire," said the fellow. So the king gave him money and sent him away with orders to lose no time. With the king's money, the fellow bought perfumes and incense and aromatics of all sorts, and opened a perfumery shop close to the family priest's house. Now, the family priest's house was 7 stories high and had 7 gateways, at each of which a guard was set, a guard of women only, and no man but the Brahmin himself was ever allowed to enter. The very baskets that contained the dust and sweepings were examined before they were passed in. Only the family priest was allowed to see the girl, and she only had a single waiting woman. This woman had money given her to buy flowers and perfumes for her mistress, and on her way she used to pass near the shop where the fellow had opened, and he, knowing very well that she was the girl's attendant, watched one day for her coming, and rushing out of his shop, fell at her feet, clasping her knees tightly with both hands and blubbering out, "Oh, my mother, where have you been all this long time?" And his confederates, who stood by his side, cried, "What a likeness! Hand and foot, face and figure, even in style of dress, they are identical." As one and all kept dwelling on that marvelous likeness, the poor woman lost her head, crying out that it must be her boy. She too burst into tears. And with weeping and tears, the two fell to embracing one another. Then said the man, "Where are you living, mother?" "Up at the family priest's, my son. He has a young wife of peerless beauty, a very kinnari for grace, and I am her waiting woman." "And whither away now, mother, to buy her perfumes and flowers? Why go elsewhere for them? Come to me for them in future," said the fellow, and he gave the woman beetle, bdellium, and so on, all kinds of flowers, refusing all payment. Struck with the quantity of flowers and perfumes which the waiting woman brought home, the girl asked why the Brahmin was so pleased with her that day. "Why do you say that, my dear?" asked the old woman. "Because of the quantity of things you have brought home." "No, it isn't that the Brahmin was free with his money," said the old woman, "for I got them at my son's." And from that day forth, she kept the money the Brahmin gave her and got her flowers and other things free of charge at the man's shop. Now, he a few days later made out to be ill and took to his bed. And when the old woman came to the shop and asked for her son, she was told he had been taken ill. Hastening to his side, she fondly stroked his shoulders as she asked what ailed him, but he made no reply. "Why don't you tell me, my son? Not even if I were dying could I tell you, mother. But if you don't tell me, whom are you to tell?" "Well then, mother, my malady lies solely in this, that hearing the praises of your young mistress's beauty, I have fallen in love with her. If I win her, I shall live. If not, this will be my deathbed." "Leave that to me, my boy," said the old woman cheerily, "and don't worry yourself on this account." And with a heavy load of perfumes and flowers to take with her, she went home and said to the Brahmin's young wife, "Alas, he is my son in love with you, merely because I told him how beautiful you are. What is to be done?" "If you can smuggle him in here," replied the girl, "you have my leave." Hereupon the old woman set work to sweeping together all the dust she could find in the house from top to bottom. This dust she put in a huge flower basket and tried to pass out with it. When the usual search was made, she emptied dust over the woman on guard, who fled away under such ill treatment. In like manner she dealt with all the other watchers, smothering in dust each one in turn that said anything to her. And so it came to pass that from that time forward, that no matter what the old woman took in or out of the house, there was nobody bold enough to search her. Now was the time. The old woman smuggled the fellow into the house in a flower basket and brought him to her young mistress. He succeeded in wrecking the girl's virtue and actually stayed a day or two in the upper rooms, hiding when the family priest was at home and enjoying the society of his mistress when the family priest was off the premises. A day or two passed, and the girl said to her lover, "Sweetheart, you must be going now." "Very well. Only I must cuff the Brahmin first." "Certainly," said she, and hid the fellow. Then when the Brahmin came in again, she exclaimed, "Oh, my dear husband, I should so like to dance, if you would play the lute for me." "Dance away, my dear," said the family priest, and struck up forthwith. "But I shall be too ashamed if you're looking. Let me hide your handsome face first with a cloth, and then I will dance." "All right," said he, "if you're too modest to dance otherwise." So she took a thick cloth and tied it over the Brahmin's face so as to blindfold him, and blindfolded as he was, the Brahmin began to play the lute. After dancing a while, she cried, "My dear, I should so like to hit you once on the head." "Hit away," said the unsuspecting dotard. Then the girl made a sign to her lover, and he softly stole up behind the Brahmin and smote him on the head. Such was the force of the blow that the Brahmin's eyes were like to start out of his head, and a bump arose on the spot. Smarting with pain, he called to the girl to give him her hand, and she placed it in his. "Ah, it's a soft hand," said he, "but it hits hard." Now, as soon as the fellow had struck the Brahmin, he hid, and when he was hidden, the girl took the bandage off the family priest's eyes, rubbed his bruised head with oil. The moment the Brahmin went out, the fellow was stowed away in the basket again by the old woman, and so carried out of the house. Making his way at once to the king, he told him the whole adventure. Accordingly, when the Brahmin was next in attendance, the king proposed a game with his dice. The Brahmin was willing, and the dicing table was brought out. As the king made his throw, he sang his old catch, and the Brahmin, ignorant of the girl's naughtiness, added his, always excepting my girl, and nonetheless he lost. Then the king, who knew what had passed, said to his family priest, "Why accept her? Her virtue has been given away." "Ah, you dreamed that by taking a girl in the hour of her birth and placing a sevenfold guard round her, you could be certain of her. Why, you couldn't be certain of a woman, even if you had her inside you and always worked about with you. No, woman is ever faithful to one man alone. As for that girl of yours, she told you she would like to dance. Having first blindfolded you as you played the lute to her, she let her lover strike you on the head and then smuggled him out of the house. Where then is your exception?" And so saying, the king repeated this verse. Yang Brahmano avadesi, Vinang Samukhavetito Andabhuta Bhatad Parya Tasuko Jatu Visase. The Brahmin, who with a veil that covered his face played the lute, supported his inexperienced wife, or more correctly, probably supported his wife since birth. Who could have faith in these? So now if we just scroll down a little bit to in such wise the Bodhisattva expounded the Dhamma to the Brahmin. Sorry, one paragraph up, Rob. Great. And the Brahmin went home and taxed the girl with the wickedness of which she was accused. "My dear husband, who can have said such a thing about me?" she said. "Indeed, I am innocent. Indeed, it was my own hand and nobody else's that struck you. And if you do not believe me, I will brave the ordeal of fire to prove that no man's hand has touched me but yours. And so I will make you believe me." "So be it," said the Brahmin. And he had a quantity of wood brought and set light to it, and the girl was summoned. "Now," said he, "if you believe your own story, brave these flames." Now, before this, the girl had instructed her attendant as followed: "Tell your son, mother, to be there and to seize my hand just as I'm about to go onto the fire." And the old woman did as she was bidden. The fellow came and took his stand among the crowd. Then, to delude the Brahmin, the girl standing there before the people exclaimed with fervor, "No man's hand but thine, Brahmin, has ever touched me, and by the truth of my asseveration, I call on this fire to harm me not." So saying, she advanced to the burning pile, when up dashed her lover, who seized her by the hand, crying shame on the Brahmin, who could force so fair a maid to enter the flames. Shaking her hand free, the girl exclaimed to the Brahmin that what she had asserted was now undone, and she could not now brave the ordeal of fire. "Why not?" said the Brahmin. "Because," she replied, "my asseveration was that no man's hand but thine had ever touched me, and now here is a man who has seized hold of my hand." But the Brahmin, knowing that he was tricked, drove her from him with blows. Such, we learn, is the wickedness of women. What crime will they not commit? And then, to deceive their husbands, what oaths will they not take? Aye, in the light of day, that they did it not. So false-hearted are they. Therefore, it has been said, a sex composed of wickedness and guile, unknowable, uncertain as the path of fishes in the water. Womankind hold truth for falsehood, falsehood for truth. As greedily as cows seek pasture new, women unsated yearn for mate upon mate. As sand unstable, cruel as the snake, women know all things, naught from them is hid. Even so, it is impossible to guard women, said the teacher. His lesson ended, he preached the truth, and the passionate monk became a stream enterer. And in the Jataka, he identified himself with the king of Benares. So he was the king who sent the trickster. All right. So it's a delightful little story with a moral that I'm sure that you're all going to be thrilled to teach to your kids and to pass this down from generation to generation. Now, just in case you were wondering, okay, first of all, let me say that the message of the story, which is that women can't be trusted, you will be shocked to know is not actually true, and that actually women commit adultery at far less rates than men do. I know, shocking, right? And also, it's also true that women's testimony when it comes to sexual assault is, generally speaking, extremely reliable. And the rates at which women actually lie about sexual assault and matters like that is usually estimated at something like 5% or something. So, so we can just get that out of the way to start with, that the tale, I shouldn't call it a sutta, is not actually factually correct. Fine. Now can we come back up to the top of the story, Rob? How are we all going, by the way? Surprised? Please feel free to put your reactions in the chat. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up here is because I wanted to make it plain that actually we do find this kind of misogyny in the Buddhist tradition. And I know that questions on like bhikkhuni ordination and all of these things have been a major part of discussion in Buddhist tradition in the last number of years. And when Dhamma is presented, especially when it's presented in English-speaking environments, we tend to gloss over this kind of thing. And look, for very good reasons. Normally, I'm not going to be going around and teaching this kind of thing unless we have a particular context to do it in. But the reality is that it's there. And once we can recognize that there is, in fact, quite grotesque misogyny in the Buddhist tradition, then we have to start asking, what does that mean? What actually is going on here? How does this happen? Where do these stories come from? Why do they get maintained? Why is there so little critical reflection on them within the Buddhist tradition? So these are some of the questions which I think need to be discussed or are interesting to discuss. But let's go back and look at the story and just sort of look in some more detail as to exactly what's going on. Can you guys excuse me for 1 minute? I'm just going to get myself a glass of water. Sorry. All right. So one of the things that's been nice for me the last few days here in Sri Lanka is to see that we have had bhikkhunis involved in the ceremonies we're doing for offering the Tripitaka, and we've been able to give some of the sets to the bhikkhunis. Obviously, still the Sangha, overwhelmingly is male-dominated in Sri Lanka, but the presence of bhikkhunis has become sort of quite normalized, I think. And so we do find that, at our big ceremony we did at BMICH, we had bhikkhunis who were present. They had their own dedicated seats for them. We had bhikkhunis offering flowers on the shrine along with the monks, and we had bhikkhunis who were on the stage receiving the gifts, again, along with the monks and the senior teras and the senior teachers. So you can see that even though, I would never try to sort of justify any kind of discrimination or anything like that. And if we look at the system as it is in Sri Lanka today, is it discriminatory? Yes, of course. But Are there steps in the right direction? Yes, there are also. So these things are not necessarily as one-sided. So to me, it's much more important always to look at what direction are things going in. Okay, let's just continue down a little bit and look at what exactly is going on. Okay, so first of all, come to the idea that the Bodhisattva in this was a righteous king. Now, on one level, you can say, well, yeah, not really, but I mean, it could be a lesson. You could use this as a kind of a lesson of the dangers of gambling, right? I mean, how he was corrupted by the game, the dicing table. But the story doesn't really want to draw that lesson. So he used to play dice with his family priest. Okay, so let's just stop there for a minute. So in ancient Indian culture, the idea was that you had a king who was from the Khattiya class, and he was responsible for administering the country, for defending the country, and all of those kinds of things. And then the king was advised by the family priest or the Purohita. And the Purohita was somebody whose job was to be educated in the traditional law and the texts and so on, and to advise the priest and the family priest. And the Purohita and the king often had a very close relationship. We see this in a number of places in the suttas. The kings, in fact, would be known or be addressed by the family name of their family priest. This is how close the relationship was. So the name Gautama, in fact, the Buddha's clan was a Khattiya clan, but Gautama is a Brahmanical clan name. So why the Buddha is called Gautama and Buddha's family is called Gautama is because the Purohita was from the Gautama lineage. And so his family is addressed that way. And we see this kind of usage a number of times in the suttas as different people from the Khattiya clan are addressed by the name of their Brahmin chaplain. So we can see that closeness of them there, right? However, the idea is that they should work together to secure the safety and prosperity of their kingdom and its people, not that they should hang around playing dice all the time, much less that they should be cheating on dice. And this is very much a betrayal of the sacred oaths of the royal family. And we see that this actually, of course, was a cultural reality. And the harm of it was also very much understood as one of the central motifs in the Mahabharata, where the whole kingdom is gambled away. So the king would sing this what's it called? The Juti Pada. I just remember the name of it. The Juti Gata or something like that. So basically, it's a special verse of or lucky charm that he would sing when he was gambling. The literal that translation is not too bad, but the literal translation would be something like, all rivers are winding, all trees are made of, all forests are made of wood, all women do evil when they get the, when they can hide it. And the word is like a word meaning when they can be covered or when they can be not discovered. So if they can get away with it, they will do evil. So what's going on here? Well, this idea is harking back to the old Indian idea of the asseveration of truth. And we can see in this whole story that the notion of truth is highly important, right? The idea of the asseveration of truth can be traced back as far as the Rig Veda. So it is a very old idea. And the idea is somehow that an utterance of a truth can be so powerful as to have real world effects. Now, so Ajahn comments in the Mahabharata, he doesn't just gamble away his kingdom, but also his wife, right? Yeah, anyway, I mean, these kinds of stories don't come from nowhere, right? I mean, obviously, this is the kind of thing that kings were doing. Anyway, where was I? Sorry, I completely lost my track. The king, righteous king dies. Oh, yes, right. So the asseveration of truth, right? But the whole thing with the asseveration of truth is it's supposed to be something sacred, right? You don't just say like, oh yeah, it's Tuesday today, therefore may the washing up be done, and then suddenly your washing up is done, right? You don't just like abuse it for trivial worldly ends, right? You have to. It's actually something that is very dignified and very rare and special and sacred. And so, for example, well, anyway, I could give you some examples, but that's the basic idea. So here, the king is quite abusing this idea. Like, not only is he abusing his royal responsibilities by whiling away his time gambling, but he's also basically cheating or kind of hacking the idea of the asseveration of truth, demeaning the idea to merely win at gambling, when it is supposed to be a sacred oath whose efficacy is guaranteed by the gods. So this is like another step down that line of depravity which the king is doing. Okay. Then just a little note here. So it says to seek out a little maid who had never seen another man. That's not exactly what the Pali says, a bit of a paraphrase of what the Pali says, but the Pali uses the word here, purisantara, which is an idiom which we find in the Vinaya and in other places, which means, more literal translation would be something like a woman who has never been with a man. That would be a more literal translation, a woman who has never been with a man. Right? So first of all, who thinks like this, right? I'm going to win at this game of dice. Therefore, I'm going to have to get this girl and lock her up in a tower for her whole life. Okay. All right. I don't know. Maybe he could have asked the king to not say his verse before the game. That would have been another option. But anyway, fine. So I'm going to get the girl and lock her up and lock and key in his own house. Okay. I must take a newborn baby girl. All right. So then a little further down, it says he was skilled in signs. So again, I hope the sound is okay. There's a car parked outside just at the moment. Hopefully that'll go away in a minute. So he was skilled in science. Again, this is his. He's the family priest. He's supposed to be the advisor and the font of wisdom and principle who keeps the nation on track by making sure that everybody's behaving in the right way. And one of the things that they learn there is what they call anga vidya, literally the knowledge of limbs or the knowledge of parts of the body. And the purpose of the Anga Vidya, whether you believe in it or not, is another thing. But the purpose of Anga Vidya is so that the king's advisor can then assess the character of people that the king deals with, right? So people come to see them, then you can see, this person going to be trustworthy and not, right? It's a science you learn for a purpose. And again, you can see the priest is abusing his supposedly sacred knowledge in order to do this. So my point here is that it's not these characters are not merely harming the women that they're getting involved with, but they're also betraying their own sacred duties. All right, so he finds a poor woman and then comes and says, okay, come and give birth in my house. Okay, so now we'll add this to the growing list of despicable behaviors that this guy is doing. He's going to exploit this impoverished single mother so he can win his game of dice by bribing her to take her little baby girl away from her. The most horrifying things that you can possibly imagine. Give her a bit of money. Okay, get lost now. I've got your baby girl. Anyway, okay, so she was kept in confinement and no men were ever allowed to set eyes on her. Okay, now this kind of motif of the girl who is kept confined and brought up in confinement is, of course, a very, very common one in storytelling and so on. And many fairy tales like Rapunzel and even Sleeping Beauty, or many others where we find similar kinds of motifs. And this can reflect a number of different sort of cultural dimensions, one of which is the confinement of girls in their menstruation. So girls would often be confined, especially when their first menstruation, but often each month after that. And then they were isolated from the world, sometimes isolated from the ground. There's a great chapter in James Fraser's Golden Bough where he talks about this, not to touch the air, not to see the sky. I think I mentioned this last week when discussing the Bodhisattva who was suspended in the air. So this confinement is for a specific purpose here, but it's also part of a wider storytelling motif. Let's scroll down a little bit further. Okay, now while girl was growing up, the family priest forbore to play with the king. All right, so this also it's a kind of a lesson in the power of addiction, right? I mean, he's spending maybe 16 years not playing his favorite game of dice, just so that at the end of that 16 years he can beat the king, right? And again, that's not the relationship that a priest, the family priest is supposed to have with the king. They're supposed to actually help them and support them. Anyway, okay, so when she was grown up and under his own control, he challenged the king to a game. Now, one thing about this story, which I think is worth noting, is that the story does not imply that the Brahmin was sexually abusing the girl, right? And seems clear, in fact, that he wasn't, which, okay, fair enough. It's a low bar, all right, in terms of behavior. But as far as I can tell, he wasn't actually sexually abusing her, or at least he's not depicted as doing that. So I guess that's something in a way. All right. So then they would throw the dice and the priest started winning. Next, okay, thinking the matter over, the Bodhisattva suspected the family priest had a virtuous girl shut up in his house. I don't know, I lose a game of dice? Why would that be? Oh, he must have a virtuous girl locked up in his house. Okay, it's a leap of logic, but I guess it worked out for him. And so he had inquiries. Now, then he sent for a clever fellow. The Pali here is dhuta, for clever fellow. A dhuta often is used in the sense of an addict. So you have like an aki dhuta is a gambling addict, or a sura dhuta is an alcoholic. But the root of the word means more like, it often means like scoundrel or rogue, but it also has a sense of being a deceiver, a trickster, or a con man. And so in this particular case, probably con man would be the best translation. So found a con man and asked him whether he thought he could seduce the girl. Certainly, sire. So the king gave him some money and sent him away with orders to lose no time. All right. So then he sets up this whole shop. They're running a whole business. Seems like that would take a while, right? I mean, he's not just doing this on a weekend, right? This is a substantial investment. Now, the family priest's house was 7 stories high and had 7 gateways. A large house, right? 7. Is there anyone here who has a 7-story home? I don't think so. Not many people have 7-story houses these days. So 7-story house was pretty big. Remember, he was the chief advisor for the king. These guys, I mean, that's fabulously wealthy. And one does wonder why it is that so often those who are fabulously wealthy spend their time doing such ridiculously trivial and petty things rather than like literally anything else. So anyway, so 7 guardians, all of whom were women. Another kind of interesting motif there. So if okay, and I'm not going to deny that the Brahmin is not necessarily an icon of treating women well at all, but he did give employment to some of the women who were guarding the doors. Okay, so there's something there, right? Actually, this is a genuine thing you find in the Samanyapala Sutta, that when King Ajatasattu sets out from his palace to visit the Buddha in the Ambawana, that he is surrounded by his royal guard, who were all women. And I always thought that that was like a sort of a particular dramatic detail for that sutta to represent the king's extreme paranoia. But it turns out that that's not actually the case, and that the idea that that kings or that important persons would be guarded by guards of women was quite standard. And there's a number of references of that in ancient India. So this motif that the guards were women definitely is a realistic detail. Okay, the very baskets that carried the dust and sweepings were examined before they were passed in. Foreshadowing. Nice bit of foreshadowing here, right? And so you can see that this is, I mentioned at the beginning, that regardless of what one might imagine, morally speaking, that this is actually a very well constructed piece of storytelling, right? So we've used this just a sort of passing reference to the dust which might be swept up, and it will play, this is kind of Chekhov's dust basket, if you will. It will play a role later on. Only the family priest was allowed to see him, single waiting woman. And so then he goes and convinces this poor waiting woman that she's the mother. So, like, one of the things about this story, it's not just the girl who gets maltreated, but the women generally in the story have a pretty rough time. First of all, they're serving the poor woman who gets her paid off to have her daughter taken away from her. And now the waiting woman, who gets taken in as a purely incidental victim of this con man, and the story doesn't care about her at all. It's got no feeling for what happens to her, but she's merely a fool who gets taken advantage of by a con man. So if we can scroll down a little bit, Rob. And the mother does, the waiting woman who's conned into thinking that the boy's her son. Like, we don't go into the story of how she lost a son. I mean, having a son and losing them is not necessarily something that a woman would just do and forget about it. So generally, why we don't really go into that. I guess the story didn't want to divert for telling that story. But I mean, clearly the woman here is trying to do the right thing. I mean, she's just thinks it's her son, and she's being nice, and she's trying to help people. Anyway, so she acts as the go-between, and the con man, pretending to be the son, then puts on this whole act, and this whole kind of vulnerability act, which I think is kind of, again, terrible, right? But also quite entertaining and hilarious. That's his kind of way in. Like, you'd think he'd be like the tough guy or something like that, the hero who's going to rescue her or something, but no, he's in tears and can't move from his bed. Anyway, okay, so can we scroll down a little bit further? So then the woman got sweeping together all the dust she could find in the house, put in a huge flower basket, and then when she was searched, she would empty the dust over the guards who were doing the searching. Again, a kind of hilarious detail, which, would be great in a dramatic representation of it. Call back to the dust, which was mentioned beforehand. And look, this woman, that's a pretty nifty idea, right? I mean, she's thinking this through. And this is kind of crafty. There's a level of craftiness in all of this. Oh, by the way, sorry, I missed one detail. Can we just scroll back up just one or two paragraphs? Keep going up a little. One more paragraph, sorry. Right. So when the son first convinced the mother that he was, sorry, when the con man first convinced the waiting woman that he was her son, you can see one of the key ways he did that was that his confederates who stood by his side cried out what likeness of hand and foot and so on. This, again, is a very realistic detail. And I recently was researching on the Sattajatila Sutta, the 7 Jatilas or matted hair ascetics, who turned out to be spies in the pay of the king. And that led me to the Arthashastra, which gives a lot of details in the operation of spies within the realm. And one of the key details is that they use this method all the time for convincing people. You basically have one person who's the lead, and then there are a bunch of other people who happen to be standing around who will then support you. So if this might be, let's say, a fake monk or a fake ascetic who gives a prophecy to somebody, a businessman, and then people around will say, oh, yes, his prophecy's always worked out. I invested as he told me to, and I made all of this money. And so this was like a standard way of operating. And the Arthashastra goes into quite a lot of detail as to how to do all of this, how to set it up. So you like, if you go to the monastery of a fake ascetic, you like make the offering. You get your prophecy, and it says, oh yes, the stars are aligning such and such and such and such. And the other ascetics around will say, ah, yes, that must be true. That monk said that. And it just happens to be that another merchant wanders into the monastery, and he overhears it, and he said, ah, yes, this is true because this also happened to me. And so there's like multiple layers to these people. It goes on, kind of goes on and on. And then while you're doing that, the actual job of the spy in that scenario is to, they give the spy a set of stories and examples of how to tell stories. And in the story, perhaps there might be, let's say, a lion and a jackal. And when they're telling the story, then they might make a passing remark to the effect that, oh, our king these days, he's a lot like the jackal in that story, isn't he? And then gauging the response of the merchant to see whether he's loyal to the king or not. And if the merchant is loyal and said, no, the king is very much the lion in that story, then the king will make sure that the prophecy actually comes true. So that then the ascetic goes and talks to the king's minister, and if they're loyal, then they make sure that their business does in fact prosper. So this is how this all works. So my point here being that the depiction here is by no means unrealistically elaborate. And these kinds of networks of deception and multiple reinforcing deception, which of course we see a lot today, right? There's a lot of how things work on social media and so on, creation of different bots and alt accounts and all of these things. This is a very old technique. Anyway, Rob, let us move down. Thank you. So she got the dust sprinkled over the guards, smuggled the man in the flower basket. Great. Then succeeded in wrecking the girl's virtue. And the Pali phrase there is a silang bheda. So broke her sila and stayed there for a while. And then when she said to him she must be going now, then of course we come to this wonderful plot twist. And the lover, okay, before I'm going to sneak out, got everything we wanted. He's like, remember, he's already accomplished his mission, right? His only mission was to seduce the girl, which is already done. That's fine. But now I must give the Brahmin a punch, okay? Why? The king didn't ask him to do this. It's a completely random event. Now, most likely, I imagine, like sometimes these events are kind of back-formed, right? There was a story about somebody punching a Brahmin in the face while he played the lute, and then he had to sort of express this desire to do it. But anyway, great plot twist here. So I must punch him in the face. Certainly, says she. No argument there. And then now, I want to dance, but you play the lute, but then you have to blindfold yourself. Okay, fine. You're going to blindfold. Then she says to him, my dear, I would so like to hit you once on the head. And he says, hit away. Now, okay, let me just say right from the front here, you'll find no kink shaming in this discussion, okay? If that's your thing, then you want to put on some blindfolds and get punched in the face, then that's fine. That's your I'm not here to judge anybody for what they get up to in the privacy of their own home. Nonetheless, it does seem to be a rather abrupt request for an innocent girl who has never been involved in anything and is suddenly getting into these what appear to be rather elaborate role-playing ceremonies. So sure, you can punch me if in the face if you like, okay. And then, of course, the lover stole up and hit him on the head instead. And we can stroll down a little bit, Rob. Such was the force of the blow. Sorry, up a couple of lines. Thanks. The Brahmin's eyes were like to start out of his head, and a bump rose on the spot. He got the girl's hand, and he said, it's a soft hand, but it hits hard. Once again, like no no king shaming here, like that's fine. Okay. As soon as the fellow had stuck the Brahmin, he hid, and then she looked after him. They snuck the Brahmin out. Then the king, the con man told the king, and the king said, aha, got you, to the Brahmin. And we scroll down a little bit. And then we finally have the verse of the which gives the story its name, Yang Brahmano Avadesi, Veenang Samukhavetito. So the Brahmin who was playing the veena with his face wrapped in a like a bandage, literally, like a wrap. Andabhuta Bhata Bharya. So the interesting kind of idiom here is the word Andabhuta. Anda means an egg. Andabhuta, so literally has been raised since she was an egg. It's the literal translation of this. So it's obviously kind of an idiomatic phrase. So the English translation here has inexperienced wife. So it's somewhat more interpretive. I translated it since infancy. But as we know from the story, that literally from the time that she was born. Who could have tasu ko jatu vissase, right? How could anyone have trust in women? Because obviously it's only the women who have played and acted in an untrustworthy manner in this story. Okay, let us scroll down a little bit. Thank you. Great. Now, then this kind of interesting little coda. He accuses her. She protests her innocence. It was my hand that struck you, no one else's. So she says, I will step on the fire. So this kind of is an interesting motif. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like witch burning. We're trying to judge who's the witch and who isn't the witch by having them put on some fire, and if they burn, then they're a witch. So she, obviously this is a dramatic move, and like once again you can see that the characters in this story, they're like the waiting woman. On the one hand she got fooled by the con man, but on the other hand she actually came up with a pretty clever scheme for getting him into the room and out again. And the same thing with the con man, right? He's only this con man, but he had a fairly long-term planning scheme to get his desires. And here too, she is like obviously driven to desperation, right? This is a desperate move, but she's thinking fast on her feet, and she has a way to try to save herself. Now, the way she has to save herself, right, is not just random, but it depends on the very idea which the text has been dealing with since the beginning, which is the idea of an assevation of truth. So the whole original gambling verse, and which enabled the king's success, and then to be broken by the Brahmin. So within the universe of the story, to seek a resolution to that through an assevation of truth is very much thematically appropriate. So again, this is why I was saying that like in terms of like a storytelling construction, this actually is a really well put together story. And you could see that, like, again, leaving aside any moral quibbles that one might have with the content. But you can see it's an incredibly entertaining story. There's a twist in almost every paragraph, right? Okay. So in such wise did, so she said she was innocent. She's going to step onto the flames. And then she tells her waiting woman, tell your son to come and seize my hand as I'm about to step onto the fire. And so that's what they did. So if we scroll down a little bit. So one of the kind of the themes about this is how this idea of an asseveration of truth can be corrupted and misused. So here she's deliberately trying to misuse it as a way of getting out of being burned to death, which fair enough. Look, okay, I mean the priest and the king corrupted the idea of an asseveration of truth so they could just win at a game of dice. She's doing it because there are going to be serious consequences, and she well knows. So the Brahmin grabs her hand. She says, oh, now I can't say that no man has ever seized my hand. And then the Brahmin, knowing that he was tricked, drove her from him with blows. Okay. And look, one of the things about the Gurumana Sapatan. Sorry, I'm just looking for the Pali for that verse, that line. Potedwa. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that you find in Buddhist verses that you do, and some of these stories, and this Jātaka story is by no means alone. In fact, these verses which we're quoting at the end here are actually quoted from other Jātaka stories. And there are quite a few Jātakas that have this kind of message. Nonetheless, I do have to say one, again, low bar, but one thing that they never do is justify violence against women. And so this is something that is justified in many ancient texts, including ancient religious texts and so on. And we do not find that in ancient Buddhist texts anywhere, so far as I'm aware. And so there's never saying we can say that women are wicked, all right, but we don't use that to justify violence. Obviously, I mean, a lot of other terrible things have happened, but that one particular terrible thing is never justified, nor is taking sexual advantage of women or ever justified in that way. And just by way of comparison, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which was 100 or 200 years probably before the Buddha in a similar environment, it does in fact say that if a wife does not agree to have sex with her husband, that as a last resort he should beat her and force her to have sex with him. So that is actually allowed in the Upanishadic tradition and the Vedic tradition, but not in the Buddhist tradition. All right, so this reaches the end of the story. And I don't know about you, but there's a bunch of questions which which are asked by that. And I am going to, I think we can, we might as well leave the screen sharing for now. I'm going to just have a look. There's a bunch of comments in the chat. I'm going to have a look through those first, but please, if you've got any questions and so on, then happy to take them. Giordano says, the story seems like a lesson on bad conduct. It seems it shows how miserable people are who have wrong view or unwholesome priorities, right? I mean, it does, you know, there seems to be a tension between the explicit lesson of the story, which is women are bad, and the actual story itself, which is that these men have been driven to corruption through their proclivities. And it's kind of one of the details about storytelling, which is kind of interesting, right? Because subtext is often more important than text, right? Once you make the moral of the story explicit, then kind of it often loses its power, actually. And the thing that people take away from the story is not necessarily the moral. The thing that people take away is the emotional feeling that the story gives them. Yeah. So again, I don't want to sort of try to like ameliorate or reduce the story as well. But I can't help but feeling that if you were telling this story to a crowd of people, right, that probably the women in the audience, and maybe some of the men as well, would probably be maybe hearing a different story than what the message of the story was supposed to be, right? So yeah. So Ajahn, yes, mentioned that king gambled away his kingdom and his wife. Ananda mentions love and betrayals, the importance of the truth. The Jātakas are later additions, not part of the EBT. Yes, that's correct. We've discussed that in earlier classes. Right, and Ajahn adds there that in the Mahabharata, the giving away of the kingdom was done by a very righteous king. That was Yudhishthira, right, who did that, the gamble away his king. And so, again, that's a similar kind of idea, right, that the gambling leads to such moral corruption. I think, to be honest, I do feel that we kind of underestimate the extent to which that's a really corrupting influence in society. From what I know, one second. Sorry, someone's starting up a chainsaw outside. Give me one moment. I will close the windows. Hopefully this chainsaw won't last for long. All right. Yeah, so as far as I know, gambling addiction causes a much greater societal harm than alcohol or drugs, and yet we seem to regard it as something which is kind of fun and nice and allowable. I mentioned this to Dhirayupa the other day, that in Perth, they have the Thai people will had an expression, and the monks couldn't quite understand the expression that they would say. They would have to say they're going to Tambun Wat Yai, going to make merit at the big monastery, Tambun Wat Yai. And we were like, what's the Wat Yai? Oh, it turns out the Wat Lek is Bodhinyana, the small monastery, and the Wat Yai was the casino. So Tambun Wat Yai, go and make merit at the big monastery, at the casino. So that was how they managed to talk about it without letting the monks knowing what they were doing. So Dhirayupa mentions him. Pat says, yes, a king with human frailties. Yes. Dhirayupa mentions, this reminds me of a Greek myth in the story of Danae and Zeus. The god Zeus, in the form of golden rain, impregnated Danae, a princess who was imprisoned in a bronze chamber by her father to prevent a prophecy from coming true, according to multiple sources, right? Very much the same kind of motif. Zeus desired Danae, and while her father had her locked away, Zeus was able to enter her chamber as a golden shower, fulfilling the prophecy that Danae would bear a son who would kill her father. And who was the son in that case? Was it
Perseus? Perseus.
Perseus was the son, right? Yeah. Okay. That's one of the great things about the Greek myths. A lot of the Greek myths are actually a murder mystery. Who is going to kill Zeus? It's like a murder mystery before it happens. Anyway, is one of my favorite books on Greek mythology, if you're interested, Dhirayupa, is The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony, which deals with that theme, Roberto Calasso. Yes, but obviously this speaks to like anxiety around women and women's bodies, anxiety around women's bodies and women's agency. And it is so good that we're an evolved society now, and we've completely got over all of those issues. And we can look at these and think, how different things were in the past, that they were all worried about girls and their virtue, and that you had to have a bunch of men up there talking about them. So hang on, maybe... I'm sorry. I just slipped in from Bizarro World a little while ago. Yes, we do express those anxieties differently, and they're managed differently, but they are still very much present today. not just the anxiety around women's and women's bodies, but also around paternity. And this also we saw was an issue with the last story, the Katahari Jātaka, where the whole question was a question of paternity. And so that paternity is not explicitly an issue in this one, but it is in the story of dāna, and it's kind of implicit there as well. Archana, the story reminds me why she left India and chose not to raise my daughters there. Some of this stuff still happens. Yeah, it does. Yeah, and depending where you are, then there's like confinement and various other kinds of things. And I mean, I think it's, you know, to me, yeah, obviously I love India and I love Indian culture. And you can look at, of course, you can look at any ancient culture and you can see that there are some terrible things happening there, but also many beautiful and amazing things. And like one of the things I think which is really important for us to remember is that, you know, it's not up to us to insist that our culture or tradition or text or anything be perfect, right? They are as they are, and we can't change that. And there may be things that are right there, maybe things are wrong, maybe things we agree or disagree. It's okay, right? We don't have to. Imperfect is okay. It's just the world that we live in. But what is up to us is how we choose to respond to that. What things we choose to listen to, how we choose to listen to it, and how we respond. And, you know, if people in our tradition in the past have done things that are wrong, it's okay. People do things that are wrong, but we can learn from that and do something better, right? That is our choice, and it's not something that we can put back on our tradition. This is something that I learned many years ago, long before I became a Buddhist. I learned it from an Aboriginal elder, Noongar elder called Ken Colburn. And I went to, long story short, but I went to see him to talk about vegetarianism. I was doing a conference and we were inviting him to speak on vegetarianism, and I learned that he learned that he was a vegetarian. I was interested as an Aboriginal person, what was his reasoning? And he told me that he was vegetarian because of his traditional beliefs. And he said that when Aboriginal people were living in the wild and in the forest, they would have no other food, and they would have to kill a kangaroo or kill a fish or kill a snake and eat it, and they would always apologize to that creature and say, I'm so sorry, my brother, I'm so sorry, my sister, that I'm killing you, but please look, here's my family, I have to feed them. We don't have anything else to eat. And he said that his values that he'd been brought up with was that all life was precious and no life should be taken without a good reason. And he said, now I can just drive down to the shop and buy some tofu, so I don't need to eat these things. And so for him, his tradition, the meaning of his tradition, was not mindlessly repeating the same acts that his forebears had done, but it was understanding that there was a value that underlay those acts, and that in different times, different responses are called for. So that is a lesson that I learned. I was 18 when I met Ken, and that was a lesson that, you know, as you can see, all these years later, I still remember, and it's still so powerful to me. Okay, so a couple of more comments. It's also a story about patience. I mean, I guess so. I mean, the Brahmin was having to be patient. I mean, the girl would have had to learn a lot of patience too. I mean, there kind of been a lot of entertainment up there in the chamber. Oh, incidentally, if you want another story about a girl in a chamber from the Buddhist tradition, I wrote a book a few years ago called Dreams of Buddha. I can probably put a link in here for you, which is a little of Buddha. This is a little novella about Buddha, who also was put in that situation. That should get it to you. Here we go. Here's a link for Dreams of Buddha if you want. There's another story of how a girl was kept in a castle and how it didn't quite work out as her father hoped. Anyway, Right. What was the age gap, Arjuna asked, in this particular case? I mean, it seems like a lot, right? I mean, the Purohita would usually, like the Purohita would typically be aged before he was in that role, right? And the king comes to role, and he would be probably senior to the king in most cases. And then you've got at least a 16-year period, right, which is the raising. So yeah, I'm guessing he was an old man by that stage. He was probably 60 when she was 16. So yeah, I mean, like I said, the story itself doesn't say that he sexually abused her in any way. On the other hand, that behavior of him agreeing to be blindfolded and punched in the face, I don't know. Like I said, okay, moving on. So Dawn asks, why would this be associated with the Bodhisattva? What purpose might this association serve? Okay, great question, Dawn. So what we find in the Buddhist tradition is that over a period of, let's say, 100 to 300 to 400 years after the Buddha, you have like the emergence of the kind of the post-canonical literature in Buddhism. One of the developments that seemed to happen at this period was the arising of a movement, or the introduction of a movement that was much more misogynistic and much more sexist than we find in the early Buddhism. I'm not going to try to justify this argument in detail, but it seems to be associated with the Second Council and with the dynamics that happened at the Second Council. It's 100 years after the Buddha. Obviously, this is a complex historical phenomenon, but it does seem to be that there was that kind of movement. An example in the suttas would be something like the Bakula Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, which was added, according to the redactors, was added at the Second Council, and where we find some of these things being introduced. And I think Venerable Analayo has done some historical analysis around these particular texts. So you do find this kind of movement or this introduction, and in a way, that's a kind of a normal thing, actually. Like you find like a movement, like a reform movement might go one way, and then after a while it kind of swings back again and so on. Unfortunately, right, we might hope that it would continue to go in one direction. I don't have to lecture you about this. You're in the United States, so here we are. These things happen. So one of the dynamics, obviously, there's the explicit model of this, which is for the monks, right? So you have the male monastics who are being taught, watch out for women, they'll betray you, okay? And so there's a kind of a dynamic there. Now, make sure that we contrast this with the suttas, where when the question was asked, why do monks remain celibate? How do they do that when they're around women? He said, well, by treating women who are younger than you like your daughter, women who are the same age like your sister, and women who are older than you like your mother. And so this is not about you're distrustful and you're wicked and I can't trust you, but it's about actually developing wholesome emotional connections and relationships with people. And that has to be the foundation for, honestly, it has to be the foundation for a healthy monastic life. If you come into monastic life and your primary relation to women, or if you're a nun and your primary relation to men is that of distrust, then yeah, things are not going to be looking good. It's not going to work out well. And I know a lot of monks who are like that. And yeah, it is not healthy at all. And it doesn't get better. Like once you're in the monastic life, it's very easy to think of examples that are going to try to justify those kinds of things. And it tends to be kind of a self-reinforcing narrative. The story itself, one presumes, was not originally in a monastic context. It was adapted to that context when it was made into a Jātaka. Presumably it existed beforehand and was probably more of a general warning to men and to husbands. It's a kind of curious message, right? The message is that you can't ensure women will be faithful to you no matter what you do. So what exactly is what do you do then? Do you not get married? Is this a recruitment tool for the monastic life? I had this idea for a dating app called Minder, and I'm just going to share this with you right now, okay? and you can use this if you want, okay? So this dating app is called Minder, and the purpose of this dating app is to match you with people who you're not really going to match with. So that as you use the app, you get more and more frustrated, and then you think that dating is terrible and there's no point in even trying to pursue a relationship. Some people might say that's just like what dating apps are like anyway. But anyway, so this one's specially designed in order to do this. And then after a while, then you get so frustrated, then it pops up with a message and it says, you know, is dating getting you down? Are relationships not your thing? Try Buddhist monasticism. And then you can, and it's all just a stealth recruiting app for the monastic life. So perhaps, anyway, I'm just putting that idea out there for you. If you're interested, you can do that. You don't have to credit me or anything. But if it does kind of seem like what is the outcome of this? Like, if are we just generally griping about women, or yeah? Anyway. Okay. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So Ananda makes a good point that in the suttas, such as the Rajakumara Sutta, the gold standard in speaking is that you don't speak something, even if it's true, you don't speak it if you know it's going to be harmful and disliked by others, right? So this again is a standard for right speech, which you can see is, you know, clearly being betrayed, and the behavior of both the king and the priest, you know, just fundamentally in violation of their sacred vows and their sacred duty all the way through from the beginning to the end. So I think we've reached the end of our time, and I do have to leave because I've got another event to go, and I can see that they're here ready to take me off, as well as lopping some branches from the tree next to my little room here. So I'm going to have to leave. Thanks everybody for coming and sharing some time with me. It's great to see you all again. Dawn, Giordano, Constantine, Tim, Richard, Suzanne, Johnny, Pat, Marianne, Archana, and Joanna, and all of those who I can't see also. It's wonderful to see you, and hopefully this one will horrify a bit, and and at least to reflect about it. And if there's one lesson, just to repeat, I said this already, but if there's one lesson that I wanted to bring across from this, it's that we should accept the reality that these kinds of things are in fact found in the Buddhist tradition. And how we explain that, why it's there, then there can be multiple, you know, we can have many different takes on that, and that's definitely worthy of a more detailed, a more in-depth discussion than we can do here. But at least to recognize the fact that, look, just because something's in the Buddhist tradition does not mean that necessarily it's perfect, that necessarily we're going to agree with it. And we can have this kind of critical engagement with things to recognize that these things actually do have genuine effects. And, you know, these are not just stories, but these are things that genuinely do influence, especially for women's lives, women's possibilities and opportunities. And so just as today, we have seen the emergence of a virulent misogynistic culture online, of attacking women, threatening women, belittling people, demeaning women, which comes partly organically, but a lot of which is fed by bots. A lot of it is fed by engagement farms from Russia and places like this, who deliberately will stoke this kind of engagement in order to create disharmony and pain. And you've seen, in fact, if we want to look at the history of this kind of engagement online, we should probably go back at least to Gamergate. And I know Gamergate is kind of ancient history in internet terms today, but almost everything that's bad that's happened since then can be traced to Gamergate, which was specifically a misogynistic attack on women speaking their truth. Yeah. Anyway, so thanks, Rob, for hosting as always, and thank you to everybody for attending, and look forward to seeing you again next week where we have an even more horrifying story. But also, oh, I'm not going to say anything. Okay, hopefully see you next week. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.